The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store in Great Bend, Kansas, and Rosalie Sullivan knew her life was about to change forever as she pressed her gloved hand against the scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a reminder of the fire that had taken everything from her 3 years ago. It was September 1876, and the dusty frontier town looked nothing like the bustling streets of St. Louis she had left behind. But then again, she was no longer the same woman who had once walked those streets without shame or fear. The advertisement had been simple enough. Rancher seeking wife. Must be hardworking, honest, and willing to build a life on the frontier. There had been no mention of beauty, no requirement for an unblemished face, and that alone had given her the courage to respond. She climbed down from the coach, her worn leather trunk following behind with a thud that sent dust swirling around her ankles. The driver, a grizzled man who had barely spoken 2 words to her during the entire journey, nodded once before climbing back up to his seat. Rosalie stood alone on the wooden boardwalk, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain the entire town could hear it. She had written to Warren Prescott for 3 months before agreeing to this arrangement, and his letters had been kind, thoughtful, filled with descriptions of his ranch and the life he was building there. He had never asked for her photograph, and she had never offered one. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she adjusted her bonnet to shield her face, though she knew it was a futile gesture. The scar was impossible to hide completely, a raised ridge of pink tissue that still hurt sometimes when the weather changed. Children in St. Louis had stared, adults had looked away in pity or disgust, and suitors who had once called on her had vanished like morning mist. Her family, what remained of them, had suggested she take up work as a seamstress and resign herself to spinsterhood. The thought of spending the rest of her life alone, defined by a single moment of tragedy, had driven her to answer Warren's advertisement. A tall figure emerged from the shadows of the general store, and Rosalie's breath caught. The man was broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn hat pushed back on his head, and boots that had clearly seen better days. He walked with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted from life. When he stopped in front of her, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the strong jaw, the way his gaze traveled over her face without flinching. "Miss Sullivan." His voice was deep, warm like honey in tea. "Yes." Her own voice came out smaller than she intended. "Mr. Prescott, Warren, please." He reached for her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Welcome to Great Bend. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." She had expected many things in this moment. Shock, perhaps. Disappointment, certainly. Maybe even anger that she had not warned him about her appearance. What she had not expected was the way his eyes lingered on her face with something that looked almost like wonder, as if he were seeing something beautiful rather than broken. "You didn't mention the scar," she said, unable to stop herself. Better to address it now, to give him the chance to walk away before she allowed herself to hope. Warren set down her trunk and turned to face her fully. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the street, illuminating the dust motes that danced between them. "You didn't mention it in your letters," he said carefully, "but I can't say I'm surprised. People tend to hide the things they think make them less worthy, even when those things are just proof they survived something terrible." Rosalie felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough tears over the past 3 years to fill the Arkansas River. Most men would consider it grounds to end our arrangement. Then most men are fools. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that she almost believed him. "I asked for a wife who was hardworking and honest, someone willing to build a life with me. Unless you've been lying about those qualities, I'd say we have an agreement to keep. I haven't been lying. She met his gaze steadily, despite the trembling in her hands. But you should know what happened. I was engaged before, back in St. Louis. There was a fire at the boarding house where I lived. I went back in to help an elderly woman who couldn't walk. We both survived, but I got trapped under a burning beam. The scar is from that. Warren was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Then he reached up and removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture that seemed almost reverent. "You're the most beautiful sight I've seen in years, Rosalie Sullivan. Not despite that scar, but because of everything it represents. That kind of courage, that kind of heart, that's what makes a person truly beautiful." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. No one had called her beautiful since the fire. No one had looked at her the way Warren was looking at her now, as if she were something precious and rare. "You can't mean that." "I've never been much good at saying things I don't mean." He offered her his arm. "Come on, let me show you the ranch. It's about an hour's ride from town. We can talk more on the way, and you can decide if this is really what you want. If it's not, I'll pay for your passage back to St. Louis, no hard feelings." Rosalie hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm. The fabric of his shirt was warm from the sun, and she could feel the solid strength of him beneath it. "I didn't come all this way to turn back now." The smile that spread across his face transformed it completely, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." They walked to where a wagon waited, hitched to two sturdy horses. Warren helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that surprised her, then loaded her trunk into the back before climbing up beside her. The horses started forward at his command, and soon they were leaving the dusty streets of Great Bend behind, heading out into the open prairie. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. The sky was so big and blue it almost hurt to look at, unmarred by the smoke and buildings that had crowded the horizon in St. Louis. Rosalie had never seen anything quite like it, this vast emptiness that somehow felt full of possibility. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It grows on you." Warren kept his eyes on the road ahead, but she could see the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "When I first came out here 5 years ago, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Nothing but grass and sky and wind. But there's a freedom in it, a sense that you can be whoever you want to be without the weight of the past holding you down." "Is that why you came? To escape the past?" He was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she had overstepped. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "I was a soldier during the war, fought for the Union, saw things no man should have to see. When it was over, I couldn't go back to my old life in Ohio. Everything felt small and suffocating. So I headed west, worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved my money and bought my own place." "Do you have family back in Ohio?" "A sister. Margaret. She's married with 3 children now. We write sometimes, but it's not the same as being there." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Anyone who'll miss you in St. Louis." Rosalie thought of her aunt, the only family she had left after her parents had died of cholera when she was 19. "An aunt. She thinks I'm making a mistake coming out here to marry a stranger, but she didn't try to stop me." "And the man you were engaged to, what happened there?" The question was gentle, but it still hurt. "He came to see me in the hospital after the fire. He looked at my face and I could see everything change in his eyes. He made excuses, said he needed time to think. I never saw him again." His mother came a week later to collect the ring. Warren's jaw tightened. "Then he was a coward and a fool, and you're better off without him." "That's what my aunt said." Rosalie looked down at her hands, still gloved despite the heat. but it didn't make it hurt any less. No, I suppose it wouldn't. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Then Warren spoke again, his voice thoughtful. I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you right away. The ranch has a main house with 2 bedrooms. You can take your time deciding if this is really what you want, if I'm really what you want. I'm looking for a partner, Rosalie, not a servant or a decoration. Someone who wants to build a life together, share the work and the rewards. That's all I want too. She turned to look at him, studying his profile. He had a strong nose, a firm chin, and the kind of face that was more interesting than handsome. There was character in it, evidence of a life lived outdoors, of struggles overcome. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden. I'm not afraid of difficult work. Good, because there's plenty of it. But he was smiling again, that warm smile that made something flutter in her chest. I have about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, a milk cow. The house needs work. The fences always need mending, and there's always something that needs fixing or building or tending. But the land is good, the water is reliable, and I've built something I'm proud of. As they crested a small rise, Rosalie saw the ranch spread out before them. The house was a simple wooden structure, but it looked solid and well-maintained. There was a barn, a corral, several outbuildings and fields that had been carefully fenced. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. It was modest compared to some of the grand estates she had seen in St. Louis, but there was something honest about it, something real. "It's wonderful," she said, and meant it. Warren pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down. Up close, she could see the flowers someone had planted in window boxes, now slightly overgrown but still blooming with late summer color. "My mother's influence," Warren said, following her gaze. "She always said a house wasn't a home without flowers. I've tried to keep them going, but I'm better with cattle than I am with petunias." Rosalie smiled, her first real smile since arriving. "I could help with that. I was hoping you'd say so." He carried her trunk inside, and she followed, stepping into a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. The furniture was simple but well made, the floors swept clean. There was a fireplace on one wall, a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the window. Everything was orderly, almost militarily neat. "Your room is through here." Warren led her to a door on the left side of the room. Inside was a bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It was small but clean, and someone had left fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. "Did you pick those?" She couldn't help asking. He actually looked embarrassed, color rising in his tan cheeks. Seemed like the right thing to do, make the place feel more welcoming. Rosalie set her reticule on the dresser and turned to face him. They were standing close together in the small room, and she could smell the scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely male. "Thank you, Warren, for everything, for not being what I expected." "What did you expect?" His voice had gone soft, almost tender. "Someone who would take one look at me and regret his choice. Someone who would tolerate me at best, pity me at worst." She reached up and touched the scar, that familiar gesture of shame and defense. "Not someone who would call me beautiful." Warren caught her hand gently, pulling it away from her face. "I meant every word. You are beautiful, Rosalie, and brave, and I'd count myself lucky if you decided to stay." She looked up at him, at those summer sky eyes that held nothing but sincerity, and felt something shift inside her. It was too soon for love, she told herself. They had only just met. But there was something there, a spark of possibility, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. "I'd like to stay," she whispered. "If you'll have me, nothing would make me happier." He released her hand, but slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. "Why don't you rest for a bit, get settled in? I'll start on supper. Hope you like beef stew because that's about the extent of my cooking skills." "Beef stew sounds perfect." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Rosalie sank down onto the bed. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, stuffed with what felt like fresh straw and topped with clean quilts. Through the window, she could see the prairie stretching away to the horizon, the grass turning gold in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. Closer by, she could hear Warren moving around in the kitchen, the clank of pots and the splash of water. She stood and moved to the dresser, catching sight of herself in the small mirror that hung above it. The scar looked particularly vivid in this light, a stark reminder of the worst night of her life. But for the first time in 3 years, when she looked at it, she didn't see only ugliness. She saw what Warren had seen: survival, courage, a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that could be beautiful. Over the next few weeks, Rosalie settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, packed lunches for Warren to take out to the range, spent her days tending the garden, mending clothes, preserving vegetables for the coming winter. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in St. Louis, but there was a satisfaction in it that she had never felt before. Every meal she cooked, every shirt she mended, every row she weeded was tangible proof that she was building something, contributing something of value. Warren was patient with her, teaching her about ranch life without making her feel ignorant. He showed her how to milk the cow, how to collect eggs without frightening the hens, how to tell which plants were safe to eat and which would make her sick. He treated her as an equal partner, asking her opinion on decisions about the ranch and actually listening to her answers. And slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. She learned that he liked his coffee strong and black, that he had a habit of humming old war songs while he worked, that he was unfailingly gentle with animals and patient with the young horses he was training. She learned that he read voraciously, everything from agricultural journals to novels, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh. He learned that she sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs her mother had taught her, that she had a talent for making even simple food taste delicious, that she was afraid of thunderstorms but tried hard not to show it. He learned that she was stubborn and proud, that she pushed herself too hard sometimes, that she still had nightmares about the fire. The first time Warren saw her without her bonnet, truly saw her in full daylight with nothing to hide behind, was about 2 weeks after her arrival. She had been working in the garden, pulling weeds and harvesting the last of the summer squash, and had forgotten about her appearance in the simple pleasure of working with her hands in the soil. When she straightened up and saw him watching from the fence, her first instinct was to cover her face. But something in his expression stopped her. "You've been working hard," he said, coming closer. "The garden looks better than it has in years. It's good soil. The plants want to grow." She wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly self-conscious. He reached out and gently brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek, his touch feather-light. "You should leave your bonnet off more often. The sun's good for you. People stare." "There's no one here to stare but me, and I've already told you what I see when I look at you." "You're a strange man, Warren Prescott. I'll take that as a compliment." He picked up her basket of harvested vegetables. "Come on, let's get these inside. I was thinking we could ride into town tomorrow, introduce you to some of the neighbors. There's a church social on Sunday." Rosalie felt her stomach drop. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not? You know why," she gestured to her face. "People will talk. Let them talk." He said it so simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. "You're my wife, or you will be once we make it official with the preacher. Anyone who has a problem with that has a problem with me." They had not yet formalized their marriage, both of them seeming content to let their relationship develop naturally. But the word wife sent a thrill through her that she could not deny. "When were you thinking we might do that? Make it official?" Warren set down the basket and took both her hands in his. "Whenever you're ready. I don't want to rush you, Rosalie. I want you to be sure." She looked at their joined hands, his so much larger and darker than hers, calloused from years of hard work. She thought about the past weeks, the quiet companionship they had built, the way her heart lifted every time he walked into a room. It was not the passionate, overwhelming love she had felt for her former fiancé, the one who had abandoned her. This was different, deeper, built on respect and shared work and the slow discovery of each other's hearts. "I'm sure," she said quietly. "I've been sure for a while now." His face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "Then let's do it this Sunday. We can talk to the preacher after the service, have a simple ceremony right there if you're willing." "I'd like that." She squeezed his hands. "But Warren, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman I was before the fire. I have nightmares sometimes, wake up in a cold sweat thinking I'm trapped under that beam again. And there are days when I look in the mirror and all I see is the ugliness, no matter what you tell me." "I'm not the same man I was before the war," he said softly. "I have my own nightmares, my own scars. They just happen to be on the inside where people can't see them. But they're there, Rosalie, and they're just as real as yours. Maybe that's why I can see past your scar to the woman beneath. Because I know what it's like to carry wounds that won't heal." She had known he was a veteran, but this was the first time he had really spoken about it. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He released her hands and looked away toward the horizon. "Someday, maybe, when the words come easier. For now, just know that I understand what it's like to survive something terrible and come out changed. And I think that maybe two broken people can build something whole together if they're willing to try." "I'm willing," she whispered. He turned back to her, and the smile he gave her was full of tenderness and hope. "So am I." That Sunday, they rode into Great Bend together in the wagon, Rosalie wearing her best dress, a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She had arranged her hair carefully, but she did not wear a bonnet, and she did not try to hide her scar. If Warren could face the world with her, then she could be brave enough to let the world see her as she was. The church was a small wooden building at the edge of town, its white paint gleaming in the morning sun. People were already gathering outside, farmers and ranchers and townspeople in their Sunday best. As Warren helped Rosalie down from the wagon, she felt the weight of their stares, heard the sudden hush in conversation. Then a woman detached herself from a group near the door and came toward them, smiling warmly. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and graying hair tucked under a bonnet. "Warren Prescott, it's been too long since we've seen you at services, and this must be the bride we've been hearing about. Mrs. Henderson, this is Rosalie Sullivan. Rosalie, this is Sarah Henderson. She and her husband own the farm next to my place." Sarah took both of Rosalie's hands in hers, and her smile never wavered as she took in the scar. "Welcome to Great Bend, my dear. We're so glad to have you here. Warren's been alone too long, and it's good to see him with someone to share his life with." Other people began to come forward then, drawn by Sarah Henderson's warm acceptance. There were the Mitchells, who ran the general store, the Johnsons, who had a small ranch to the south, the Parkers, newcomers themselves who had arrived just 6 months ago. Not everyone was kind. Rosalie noticed some of the women whispering behind their hands, saw some of the men's eyes linger on her scar with curiosity or pity. But there were enough genuinely warm welcomes to make her feel that she might, eventually, find a place in this community. The service was simple and heartfelt, led by Reverend Matthews, a young man with a serious face and a gentle manner. He preached about love and acceptance, about seeing the good in others, and Rosalie wondered if Warren had spoken to him beforehand. After the service, they approached the Reverend together. "Reverend Matthews, Rosalie and I would like to be married," Warren said. "Today, if you're willing." The Reverend's face broke into a smile. "I'd be honored. Do you have witnesses?" Sarah Henderson and her husband Tom stepped forward without being asked. "We'd be pleased to stand up for you," Sarah said. They gathered in front of the simple wooden cross that hung behind the pulpit. Rosalie's hands trembled as Warren took them in his, but his grip was steady, anchoring her. Reverend Matthews spoke the ancient words, asking them to pledge their lives to each other, to honor and cherish, to love and protect. When it came time for Warren to speak his vows, his voice was clear and strong. "I, Warren Prescott, take you, Rosalie Sullivan, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, to work beside you to build a life we can both be proud of, to see you for who you truly are and never let you forget your worth. I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." Tears streamed down Rosalie's face as she spoke her own vows, her voice shaking but determined. "I, Rosalie Sullivan, take you, Warren Prescott, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to be your partner in all things, to work beside you and support you, to trust in your goodness and never take your kindness for granted. I promise to love you with my whole heart, for as long as I draw breath." They had no rings to exchange, but Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife all the same, and when Warren kissed her, gentle and sweet, Rosalie felt something inside her heal just a little. This was real. This was her life now. And for the first time since the fire, she felt truly hopeful about the future. The Hendersons invited them to dinner, and they spent the afternoon in the warm, cluttered farmhouse, eating Sarah's excellent roast chicken and listening to stories about the early days of Great Bend. Tom Henderson was a jovial man with a booming laugh, and he and Warren talked about cattle prices and weather patterns while Sarah drew Rosalie into conversation about preserving techniques and the best places to buy fabric. It was late afternoon when they finally headed home, the wagon creaking along the familiar road. Rosalie leaned against Warren's shoulder, tired but happy, and he put his arm around her, holding her close. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For giving me a chance, for seeing me, for making me feel like I belong somewhere again." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You do belong, here with me, always." When they reached the ranch, Warren carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the old tradition. But once inside, the laughter faded, replaced by something warmer, more tentative. They were married now, truly married, and the night stretched ahead of them full of promise and nervousness. Warren set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her scar with infinite tenderness. "I meant what I said, Rosalie. You're beautiful, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you believe it." She rose on her toes and kissed him, putting into that kiss all the gratitude and growing love she could not quite put into words. He responded with a passion that surprised her, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss until she was breathless and clinging to him. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," she whispered, surprising herself. But it was true. Somewhere in the past weeks, friendship and respect had deepened into something more, something that filled her chest with warmth and made her future seem bright. "I love you too," he said, and she could hear the wonder in his voice as if he had not expected to feel this way either. "I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stage, trying so hard to be brave. I was terrified. So was I." He smiled at her surprise. "I'd built you up so much in my mind from your letters. I was afraid you'd take one look at me and my little ranch and realize you'd made a terrible mistake." "Never." She traced the line of his jaw, learning the feel of him. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." He kissed her again, then swept her into his arms and carried her to his bedroom, the larger of the two. The room was simple like the rest of the house, but he had clearly made an effort to make it welcoming. There were fresh sheets on the bed, more wildflowers on the dresser, and the last rays of sunset streaming through the window painted everything in shades of gold and rose. What happened next was tender and sweet. Warren patient with her nervousness, showing her with his hands and his words and his body that he truly did find her beautiful. And when they lay together afterward, her head on his chest and his arms around her, Rosalie felt a peace she had not known in years. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. She was Warren's wife, a rancher's partner, a woman with a future to look forward to. That was enough. That was everything. The seasons turned, autumn giving way to winter. The Kansas winter was harsh, with biting winds and occasional snowstorms that left the prairie blanketed in white. But the ranch house stayed warm, the fire always burning, and Rosalie learned to love the quiet evenings when she and Warren would sit together, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. She threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. Warren taught her to ride, started her out on a gentle mare named Daisy, and gradually helped her build her confidence until she could ride out with him to check on the cattle. She learned to rope, though she was not very good at it, and to recognize the signs of sickness in the animals. She learned to shoot, Warren patiently teaching her to handle the rifle until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "You never know when you might need to defend yourself or the ranch," he said seriously. "I'm not always going to be here, and I need to know you can take care of yourself." She practiced faithfully, and though she hoped she would never need to use the skill, she was grateful to have it. The frontier could be dangerous, with rustlers and wild animals and the occasional band of outlaws passing through. It was good to know she was not helpless. In December, a terrible blizzard swept across the prairie, bringing snow and ice and winds that howled like demons. For 3 days, Warren and Rosalie were trapped inside the house, venturing out only to tend to the animals in the barn. The cattle had to fend for themselves, huddled together against the storm, and all they could do was hope that the herd would survive. On the second night of the storm, Rosalie woke to find Warren sitting by the window, staring out at the swirling snow. She wrapped a blanket around herself and joined him, settling into his lap and resting her head on his shoulder. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, thinking about the cattle. "We could lose a lot of them in a storm like this. We'll deal with it when the storm passes, together." He held her tighter. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Rosalie Prescott." The sound of her married name still made her heart flutter. "You were yourself. That was enough." When the storm finally passed, they ventured out to assess the damage. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the temperature had dropped so low that Rosalie's breath froze in the air. But the barn and house had held, and most of the animals had survived. They lost 15 head of cattle, found frozen out on the range, and it was a hard blow. But it could have been much worse. Over the following weeks, they worked together to get through the aftermath of the storm. They dug out paths, checked on neighbors, helped repair damage to fences and buildings. The community came together in the wake of the blizzard, everyone helping everyone else, and Rosalie felt herself becoming part of that community in a way she never had in St. Louis. Sarah Henderson became a true friend, coming by regularly to visit and share recipes and gossip. She never once mentioned Rosalie's scar, treating her like any other woman, and Rosalie was deeply grateful for that normalcy. Through Sarah, she met other women in the area, and while not all of them were as accepting, enough were kind that she began to build a social circle. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, painting the grass in shades of purple and yellow and red. The cattle that had survived the winter grew fat on the new grass, and the horses frisked like colts. Rosalie planted a larger garden than the year before, adding vegetables and herbs and even a few flowers just for beauty. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Warren took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "The ranch is doing well. We made it through a hard winter and the herd is growing. I think we're ready to start thinking about the future." "What kind of future?" She turned to look at him, curious. "A family." He said it simply, but she could hear the hope in his voice. "I always wanted children, but I never thought I'd find someone to share that with. Now I have you, and I can't help but imagine what it would be like to have a son or daughter running around the ranch." Rosalie felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. She had wanted children too, had given up on that dream when her engagement ended. The thought that she might still have that Warren wanted that with her, was almost too much to bear. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." He pulled her close and kissed her, and that night they loved each other with a new purpose, a new hope for the future. Summer brought long, hot days and brief, violent thunderstorms that Rosalie still feared but was learning to endure. The garden flourished under her care, producing more vegetables than they could possibly eat, and she spent long hours preserving the excess for the winter to come. Warren hired a hand, a young man named Jesse who was eager to learn the ranching business, and with the extra help, they were able to expand the herd and improve the infrastructure of the ranch. In August, Rosalie realized she had missed her monthly cycle. She waited another month to be sure, then told Warren one morning over breakfast, barely able to contain her joy. "I'm with child," she said, watching his face carefully. "The baby should come in early spring." For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then he let out a whoop of joy so loud it startled the chickens in the yard, and he swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We're going to have a baby," he said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "Rosalie, we're going to be parents. Are you happy?" As if she needed to ask. His face was radiant with joy. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you so much. Thank you for this gift, for everything you've given me. I love you too." She rested her hand on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing inside her. "I can't wait to meet our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Rosalie tired more easily and had to adjust her workload. Warren hovered over her like a mother hen, constantly worrying that she was doing too much, and she had to gently but firmly remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. Sarah Henderson came by regularly with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, and other women from the community stopped by with gifts and well wishes. Not everyone was kind. There were still those who looked at Rosalie's scar and whispered about the child, wondering if the disfigurement might somehow be passed on. But Warren made it clear that anyone who spoke ill of his wife was not welcome on his property, and most people were smart enough to keep their thoughts to themselves. Winter came again, milder than the previous year, and Rosalie spent the short, cold days preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes, arranged the second bedroom as a nursery, and read every book about childbirth and infant care that she could get her hands on. Warren built a cradle, working on it in the evenings by lamplight, sanding and polishing the wood until it gleamed. In late March of 1878, on a day when the first green shoots were just beginning to emerge from the still frozen ground, Rosalie's labor began. Warren sent Jessie racing into town to fetch Sarah Henderson and the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Clark, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Then he paced the main room like a caged animal while Rosalie labored in the bedroom, her cries of pain tearing at his heart. "You should go outside," Sarah told him kindly. "This could take hours, and you're not helping by wearing a hole in the floor." "I'm not leaving her," Warren said stubbornly. "Then at least sit down before you make yourself sick." He could not sit, but he did stop pacing, standing instead by the window and staring out at the prairie without seeing it. Every time Rosalie cried out, he flinched as if he had been struck. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, had survived battles that killed men all around him, but listening to his wife in pain was the hardest thing he had ever endured. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was really only 8 hours, he heard a new sound, the thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. He was at the bedroom door in an instant, and Sarah opened it with a tired but radiant smile. "You have a son," she said. "Both mother and baby are doing well." Warren pushed past her into the room where Mrs. Clark was cleaning up and Rosalie lay propped up on pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale, but when she saw him, she smiled. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Rosalie pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes scrunched shut, mouth open in a yawn. The baby had a shock of dark hair and impossibly small hands that waved aimlessly in the air. "He's perfect," Warren breathed. "Rosalie, he's absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Warren had held newborn calves and foals, had carried injured soldiers from battlefields, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of his own child in his arms. The baby was so small, so fragile, and yet so alive, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Warren felt tears streaming down his face, and he did not bother to wipe them away. "Hello, son," he whispered. "I'm your papa, and I'm going to love you and protect you for as long as I live. And this is your mama, the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman in the world." Rosalie reached out and took Warren's hand, and they sat together, the three of them, a family at last. They named him William Thomas Prescott after Warren's father and Rosalie's father, respectively. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had a powerful set of lungs and was not shy about using them when he was hungry or wet or simply wanted attention. Rosalie threw herself into motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else, and Warren was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. The ranch continued to thrive. With Jessie's help and the addition of another hand the following year, they were able to expand further, adding more cattle and even some sheep. The house got a much-needed addition, a proper parlor and a third bedroom for when William got older. They bought better furniture, invested in improvements to the barn and fences, and slowly but surely, the ranch transformed from a modest homestead into a prosperous operation. William grew into a bright, curious toddler, always underfoot and asking questions. He had Warren's blue eyes and Rosalie's dark hair, and he was utterly fearless, climbing everything he could reach and giving his parents constant heart attacks. But he was also sweet and affectionate, liberal with hugs and kisses, and both Warren and Rosalie adored him. When William was 2, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and exhaustion, but the baby, a daughter they named Ruth Amelia, arrived safely in the summer of 1880. She was tiny and delicate, with a cap of golden hair and green eyes that would later turn brown. William was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help care for her, and Rosalie's heart swelled watching Warren with both children, so patient and gentle. The years passed in a blur of work and family and quiet contentment. The ranch continued to prosper, and Warren became a respected figure in the community, known for his fair dealing and his willingness to help neighbors in need. Rosalie, too, found her place, becoming known for her excellent preserves and her skill at nursing sick animals back to health. She still bore the scar, of course. It had faded somewhat over the years, but it was still visible, still drew occasional stares from strangers. But she had long since stopped trying to hide it. It was part of her story, part of what had brought her to Warren and to the life they had built together. And whenever she felt self-conscious about it, Warren was there to remind her of her worth. One evening, when William was 5 and Ruth was 3, Rosalie stood on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. Warren came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is from what I thought it would be," she said. "When I got on that stage in St. Louis, I was so scared. I thought I was making a desperate choice, settling for whatever I could get because no one else would have me. And now—" She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the lines of his face. "Now I know that getting on that stage was the bravest, best thing I ever did, because it brought me to you and to all of this." She gestured to the ranch, to their children, to the life they had created together. Warren kissed her, slow and sweet. "I tell you all the time that you're beautiful, Rosalie, but I don't think I tell you enough how much I admire you. Your strength, your courage, your capacity to love even after everything you've been through. You're an amazing woman, and I'm grateful every single day that you chose to stay. There was never really a choice," she said softly. "My heart knew where it belonged from that first day when you looked at me and saw something worth loving. You are worth loving, more than you'll ever know." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. William ran up to them, demanding to be picked up, and Ruth toddled after him on unsteady legs. Warren scooped up William while Rosalie picked up Ruth, and they went inside together, a family bound by love and shared dreams and the quiet knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. The years continued to unfold in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. William started school in Great Bend, riding into town with Warren each morning and coming home full of stories about his lessons and his friends. Ruth was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with a love of books and flowers. She would spend hours in the garden with Rosalie, learning the names of plants and how to coax them to grow. When William was 8 and Ruth was 6, Rosalie gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel James. He was a sturdy baby with a serious expression that made him look like a little old man, but he had an infectious laugh that could brighten the darkest day. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children, laughter and arguments and the constant noise of a busy family, and Rosalie could not imagine being happier. Warren's sister Margaret finally came to visit in the summer of 1885, bringing her husband and 3 children. It was a chaotic, joyful 2 weeks, the house overflowing with people and noise. Margaret and Rosalie took to each other immediately, and Margaret told Warren privately that she was so glad he had found someone who made him happy. "I worried about you after the war," she said one evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the children play. "You were so lost, so angry. I wasn't sure you'd ever find peace." "I wasn't sure either," Warren admitted. "But then Rosalie came into my life and everything changed. She gave me a reason to hope again, to believe that the future could be better than the past." Margaret looked at Rosalie, who was playing a game with the children, her face alight with laughter. "She's lovely, Warren, and so strong. I can see why you love her. The scar doesn't bother you." "Why would it? It's just a scar. What matters is the woman beneath it, and she's clearly someone special." Warren smiled, watching his wife. "She is, more special than she realizes." As the 1880s progressed into the 1890s, the Prescott Ranch became one of the most successful in the area. They had over 500 head of cattle now, a large flock of sheep, and a reputation for breeding excellent horses. Warren took on more hands, built a bunkhouse for them, and expanded the operation year by year. But no matter how busy he got, he always made time for his family, always put Rosalie and the children first. William grew into a responsible young man, eager to learn everything about ranching and clearly destined to take over the operation someday. Ruth blossomed into a kind, intelligent girl with her mother's compassion and her father's determination. Samuel was the wild one, always getting into mischief but impossible to stay angry at because of his charm and his genuine remorse when he got caught. In 1893, when William was 15, Ruth was 13, and Samuel was 8, Rosalie surprised everyone by becoming pregnant again. She was 41 now, and the pregnancy was difficult, but she was determined to see it through. Warren worried constantly, but Rosalie insisted she was fine, that women had babies at her age all the time. The baby, another daughter they named Grace Elizabeth, arrived in early 1894 after a long and difficult labor that left Rosalie weak and exhausted. But when she held her tiny daughter, with her wisp of red hair and her impossibly long eyelashes, Rosalie declared it had all been worth it. "Our last baby," she said to Warren, who was hovering anxiously by the bed. "Our final blessing." "You're not doing this again," Warren said firmly. "I nearly lost my mind worrying about you." She smiled at him, that smile that still had the power to make his heart skip. "Agreed. 4 children is more than enough. Our family is complete." And it was. Grace was doted on by her older siblings, who took turns holding her and playing with her, and fighting over who got to help care for her. She was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, and she completed the Prescott family in a way that felt perfect and right. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. William took over more and more of the ranch operations as Warren began to slow down, his body feeling the effects of years of hard work and old war injuries. Ruth met a young teacher who came to Great Bend to work at the school, and after a careful courtship, they married when she was 19. She moved to town but visited the ranch often, and Warren walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. Samuel, true to form, was harder to pin down. He had a restless spirit, a need to see what lay beyond the horizon, and when he was 18, he announced he was heading west to seek his fortune in California. Rosalie cried for days, but Warren understood. He had been young once, had felt that same need to prove himself in the world. "Write to us," was all he said as he shook his son's hand. "And come home when you're ready. There'll always be a place for you here." Samuel did write, regular letters full of adventures and mishaps, and true to his word, he came home 2 years later, older and wiser and ready to settle down. He took up ranching with a passion he had never shown before, and Warren and Rosalie were grateful to have him back. Grace grew up adored and slightly spoiled, the baby of the family but also smart and capable. She had Rosalie's way with plants and animals, Warren's head for business, and a stubborn streak that was all her own. When she announced at age 15 that she intended to be a veterinarian, the first woman veterinarian in Kansas, no one doubted she would succeed. Through it all, Warren and Rosalie remained the heart of the family, their love for each other as strong as ever. They still worked side by side, though they had more help now and could afford to take things a bit easier. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in familiar embraces. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Warren surprised Rosalie with a party, inviting all their friends and neighbors to celebrate. The house was packed with people, the tables groaning with food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. At one point, Warren pulled Rosalie onto the makeshift dance floor and waltzed her around while everyone clapped and cheered. 20 years, he said, holding her close. Best 20 years of my life. Mine too. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The scar was barely visible now in the lamplight, faded to a thin white line, but she knew it was there, and she knew Warren could see it. But when she looked up at him, all she saw in his eyes was love. "You're still the most beautiful sight I've ever seen," he said softly, echoing the words he had spoken that first day. "That hasn't changed, Rosalie. It never will." She kissed him, there in front of everyone, and the room erupted in applause and good-natured teasing. But they did not care. They had found each other against all odds, had built a life and a family and a legacy. And they had done it together. Two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. As the 1890s gave way to the new century, the Prescott Ranch continued to thrive under the combined efforts of Warren, William, and Samuel. Technology was changing ranching, with barbed wire and windmills and better breeding techniques, and the Prescotts embraced these changes while holding on to the values that had always guided them. Hard work, honesty, and respect for the land and the animals. Warren's health began to decline in his 60s, the old war injuries and years of hard labor taking their toll. He developed a persistent cough that worried Rosalie, and his joints ached in cold weather. But he refused to slow down completely, still getting up before dawn and working until sunset, just as he had always done. "You need to take care of yourself," Rosalie scolded him one evening when she found him limping after a day of fence mending. "I'll rest when I'm dead," he said with a grin, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "Warren Prescott, you are the most stubborn man I have ever met. That's why you love me." She could not argue with that. She did love him, more than she had thought it possible to love another person. He had given her everything. A home, a family, a sense of worth that no one else had ever made her feel. The thought of losing him was unbearable, but they both knew that age came for everyone eventually. They made the most of the time they had, taking long rides across the prairie when Warren felt up to it, sitting together in companionable silence when he did not. They watched their grandchildren grow, Ruth's children and eventually William's as he married a sweet girl named Emma and started a family of his own. Rosalie herself began to slow down, her once boundless energy fading as arthritis set into her hands and knees. But she never complained, continuing to tend her garden and cook for the family and dote on her grandchildren. The scar that had once defined her was barely noticeable now, just another line on a face that had earned every wrinkle and crease through years of laughter and tears and hard-won wisdom. In the spring of 1910, Warren fell ill with pneumonia. He had been caught in a late-season storm while checking on the cattle, and despite Rosalie's best efforts to nurse him back to health, the infection settled deep in his lungs. The doctor came from town, but there was little he could do beyond making Warren comfortable. Rosalie sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand and talking to him even when he was too weak to respond. The children took turns visiting, and Warren rallied enough to speak to each of them, to tell them he was proud of them and that they should take care of each other and their mother. On a soft evening in April, with the windows open to let in the scent of blooming wildflowers, Warren opened his eyes and looked at Rosalie. His breathing was labored, each breath a struggle, but his gaze was clear. "Rosalie," he whispered, "I'm here." She leaned close, tears streaming down her face. "I'm right here, my love. You made my life worth living," he said, each word an effort. "I want you to know that. Every day with you was a gift. You gave me everything," she said, her voice breaking. "You made me believe I was worth loving. You gave me a family, a home, a life I never dreamed I could have." He smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart 34 years ago. "You're still the most beautiful sight, Rosalie, now and always." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes and took one more breath, then another, then none at all. And Rosalie sat there holding his hand, feeling as if her own heart had stopped beating. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like half the county turned out to pay their respects. Warren had been well loved in the community, known for his integrity and his kindness, and person after person came to tell Rosalie how much he had meant to them. She accepted their condolences with grace, but inside she felt hollow, lost without the man who had been her anchor for so long. The children wanted her to come live with one of them, but Rosalie refused. The ranch was her home, filled with memories of Warren in every corner. She could not leave it, not yet. William and Samuel ran the operation now, but she still tended her garden, still cooked Sunday dinners for the whole family, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset. And sometimes, when the light was just right and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, she could almost feel Warren beside her, his hand in hers, his voice telling her she was beautiful. The years after Warren's death were hard, but Rosalie endured. She took comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the changing of the seasons, in the land that had sustained her family for so long. She lived to see Ruth's children grow up and have children of their own, to see Grace achieve her dream of becoming a veterinarian, to see the ranch continue to prosper under William and Samuel's capable management. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, her mind clear even as her body failed. In the summer of 1925, at the age of 73, Rosalie died peacefully in her sleep, in the same bed she had shared with Warren for over 30 years. She was buried beside him in the cemetery outside Great Bend, under a simple headstone that read "Beloved Wife and Mother." At the funeral, William stood before the assembled crowd and spoke about his mother. He talked about her courage, her strength, her capacity for love. And he told the story that had become family legend, how she had arrived in Great Bend as a mail-order bride, scarred and scared, and how Warren had looked at her and seen not the scar but the beautiful soul beneath. "My father used to say that my mother was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen," William said, his voice thick with emotion. And he was right, not because she was perfect, but because she was brave and kind and full of love. She taught us that beauty is not about appearances. It is about the courage to keep going when life knocks you down, the strength to love even when you have been hurt, the grace to see the good in people and in the world. That was my mother, and that is the legacy she leaves behind. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren wept, but they also smiled, remembering the woman who had loved them so fiercely. And as they laid Rosalie to rest beside Warren, the wind swept across the prairie, bending the grass in rippling waves, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and the promise of spring to come. The ranch stayed in the Prescott family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a living testament to the love story that had started it all. And while the world changed around it, becoming more modern and connected, the values that Warren and Rosalie had instilled remained: hard work, honesty, compassion, and the understanding that true beauty comes from within. On warm summer evenings, when the family gathered for reunions, the elders would tell the story of Warren and Rosalie to the younger generation. They would talk about the mail-order bride with the scar and the cowboy who had seen past it to the beautiful soul beneath. They would talk about the love that had sustained them through hard times and good, about the family they had built, and about the legacy they had left behind. And somewhere in that space between memory and hope, Warren and Rosalie lived on, forever young, forever in love, their story a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that love, true love, sees not with the eyes but with the heart. The ranch house still stood, expanded and modernized over the years, but still recognizable as the simple structure Warren had built with his own hands. The garden Rosalie had planted still bloomed every spring, tended now by her great-great-grandchildren who had inherited her green thumb. And on the porch, where Warren and Rosalie had spent so many evenings watching the sunset, their descendants gathered to share stories and laughter, keeping alive the memory of a love that had conquered fear and prejudice and pain. In the end, Rosalie had been right to get on that stagecoach in St. Louis, to take a chance on a stranger and a new life. And Warren had been right to see past the scar to the woman beneath, to recognize that true beauty lies not in perfection but in courage, resilience, and the capacity to love. Together, they had built something that lasted long after they were gone, a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. Their story became a touchstone for the family, a reminder that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most important journey is not the one across miles, but the one into another person's heart. It was a story of hope and second chances, of finding home in the most unexpected place, and of a love that proved stronger than any obstacle. And so the story of Warren and Rosalie Prescott lived on, told and retold, each generation adding their own memories and perspectives, but always coming back to that central truth. That on a dusty afternoon in Great Bend, Kansas, a scarred woman stepped off a stagecoach and into the arms of a man who would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew how beautiful she was. It was a simple story, really, but it was also profound, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something lasting and good. The prairie wind still blew across the Kansas plains, bending the grass and carrying the scent of wildflowers. The sun still set in glorious displays of color, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. And in the hearts of those who remembered, Warren and Rosalie's love story continued, a beacon of hope and a reminder that beauty, true beauty, is found not in flawless faces but in courageous hearts and loving souls. Their love had started with a letter and a leap of faith, had grown through shared work and mutual respect, and had blossomed into something rare and precious. It had sustained them through blizzards and droughts, through loss and joy, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. And in the end, it had left behind a legacy that would last long after they were gone, a testament to the power of seeing past the surface to the soul beneath. Warren had been right that first day, and he had spent the rest of his life proving it. Rosalie was the most beautiful sight, not despite her scar, but because of everything that scar represented: survival, courage, compassion, and the willingness to risk her heart one more time. She had given him everything, and he had given her the same, and together they had created something extraordinary out of the simple building blocks of daily life. Their story was over now, both of them long gone to whatever lay beyond this world. But the love they had shared, the family they had built, and the values they had instilled lived on, carried forward by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had learned from their example what it meant to truly love another person. And that, perhaps, was the greatest legacy of all: not wealth or property or even the successful ranch, but the knowledge that love, real and true and unconditional, could conquer anything, could heal any wound, and could create beauty from the ashes of tragedy. So the story ended, as all stories must, with peace and contentment, and the sure knowledge that Warren and Rosalie Prescott had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world a better place than they had found it. And if, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, the family members who gathered on that old porch thought they could hear whispers of laughter and feel the presence of something warm and loving, well, perhaps that was just their imagination. Or perhaps it was Warren and Rosalie, still together after all these years, still watching over the family and the land they had loved, still proving that some loves are strong enough to transcend even death itself.